Mike, can you share with us? Maybe this is your world. This is you interact with people that are going through this, all angles of this. What would be? Do you have a couple stories that you could share of maybe the struggle and victory here in this topic matter?
Um, I mean, I like to stay around my experience because I don't like to project, for others. But like in terms of people that I've worked with and some of the people that I've coached a little bit along the way, common theme is people will come to me saying they want to do something different. And we do some digging and we find out it's not really their actual reason for wanting to change. As an example, I coached a young person who wanted to basically be a YouTuber because what do? We see, this person's in their 20s and has had a job before, but we see um, some people like really killing it on YouTube. And we did it. We went through some exercises, which I'm still wrapping around like my protocol around this, but I call it advantage mapping basically. And we went through this process, and what we actually figured out was his talents and his aptitudes and what made him happy were all around the idea of like community management, and particularly with a nonprofit bent to it. And so he went from I want to be a YouTuber to having really clear, like a lot of clarity around I actually should be manifesting my talents in this other area because that's going to lead to happiness, and that's going to bring essentially bring out the best of me as I am today. And as I do that, I can use 15 or 20% of my time to explore YouTube as a
Mm.
hobby. But the idea of, so I think about it through a risk framework all the time. I think about career change through a risk framework. And I think you have to do that, and you have to allow yourself the time and grace to go through this exploration process, or you end up getting jaded and putting too much pressure on yourself and stopping. Like the best plan is one that you can stick to. And so you have to be able to take bite-sized chunks, and you have to be able to give yourself time and runway and take the pressure off, because you're discovering. You shouldn't inherently know as a human being. Like you can't inherently think your way to the right solution. You have to, give yourself room to explore. And so that's one instance where he identified like I have a toxic job situation and I need to do something else. And
Mm.
his idea was go be a quit, have no income, takes unemployment, and go be a YouTuber. And we figured out a way to sort of like bridge that and still allow him to like not put out that flame of creativity. Go do that, figure that out. Like my kids are experimenting with YouTube now, and I because I think like those are skills they should figure out and learn.
Mm.
And I love experimenting with it, but it's not something that you just go quit and try to be there's so many people trying to create on those types of platforms, so it's actually pretty risky.
Yeah. And that's such a huge point of this is like, there's, we talked about in the first half, there does sometimes become that point where it's like, absolutely not, I'm done. And I think it's almost become more popular in today in the marketplace today to be able. There's so many options available that people can just get up and leave. But to understand how non-strategic that is for yourself, because that can send you into a place of greater distraction and greater pain. It doesn't have to, but I think that advice that you give is like, hey, okay, let's back up a bit. Let's clarify. I think that's really important, Mike.
It's walking this fine line between too many options and too few options. The
Mm.
limiter on when you have too few options, it's mainly a mental limiter causing that. It's a scarcity mindset thing. It's shutting yourself down, and so you don't think you have options, or you don't think you can take options because you don't think you have the right skills, abilities, or whatever it is. So you don't do anything. and having too many options is that fire hose where you realize, oh shit, I can do a whole lot of things. And then you have to manage sort of this, you have to have tools in the tool bank to manage the distraction in order to get to the thing that is high probability. And
Mm.
um, so for people that are in that mode of, yes, I want to take the leap and I know I can do something different, and they're reading a million books and they're every blog and every podcast and everything, those people need tools to call the options. And what I'm trying to do through a system I'm calling advantage mapping is help people, guide people along a path of starting where they are and thinking about what there's this, Warren Buffett has this concept called circle of competence. And he talks about it like, know what you know that you know. And basically everything else is you don't know, you don't have an advantage there.
Mm.
So like as an investor, he doesn't know tech investing. He doesn't know how to value tech companies. So he just leaves them alone. Because if he plays that game, he's probably going to lose. So I'm taking that a step further and saying like, there are a bunch of different areas of advantage that you have as a human being. It's not just your knowledge and expertise or what you're doing today that you're getting paid for. That's obviously a source of advantage, but there's things like energy. So coming back to energy, it's like when something is giving you energy, that is a compound effect because you're going to be so much more effective at doing that. And you're going to adhere to that plan because you're just interested in it. Right. So curiosity, energy, how you work, what your personality is, and then thinking about like feedback from people and from your peers, and mapping out where you are today with your skills, and how you work and other ways of that you can exploit advantage, and then sort of horizontally thinking about or orthogonally thinking about how you can apply those in different ways. So that's like there's this creative push pull, there's this battle between too few options and too many options, and I'm trying to get people to sit in the middle of that and say, don't go be a yoga instructor because you think that's your passion because it looks really fun. Let's really get to know where we are and where we sit today to basically increase the odds of a success and tune out all of the distraction of these kind of long options that are out there where we're probably, if we pursued that, we're going to crash and burn in a month and we're going to lose interest or whatever.
Mm.
So I think that's the battle. And that's where I'm trying to develop curriculum and trying to develop process for young people and mid-career career changers, because if we do that as a society, we're going to allocate our resources to in a much better way. We're not going to have
Yeah.
as many 20-year-olds taking jobs in investment banking because there's a lot of money there and then burning out. And we're going to have a lot more, happy people instead of unhappy lawyers and things like that.
Yeah.
And we're going to have higher productivity as a society. So those are the types of things I'm thinking about in terms of how to help people through this path, because it is messy. And most people aren't accustomed to a sloppy, iterative discovery process. We're mostly thinking about, as I was thinking about in my 20s, linear career progress, one step in front of the other. So it's a mental shift.
That makes sense. That's cool, and it's really, like I say, refreshing to hear some of you break some of this down. I heard a lot about just the hints of learning about yourself. Some of those tests that I had to take, that when you read it on paper, and then it's like, oh my gosh, that's me. And you start to learn, okay, this is what really turns you on. This is where you could spend a lot of energy. This is what your energy thieves are. When you talk about tools, do you use some of that stuff at all? Is that stuff that you found to be pretty effective?
Absolutely. So one of the sources of advantage that I've come up with, essentially, there's 8 that I have today. This is all like in flux, but personality is the big one. And it's interesting that some of the biggest investor and most successful investors in the world. So thinking about Ray Dalio, who ran the largest hedge fund in the world, and is an author of a book called Principles and a bunch of other things that I read. He's all in on personality testing, which is really interesting, because he thinks that when you really understand and know yourself as fast as humanly possible, right? Instead of taking decades to figure this out, once you enter the work space, it's like figure it out fast. And then we live in an era where you can apply yourself in so many different ways to earn a revenue stream instead of have a job, right? Like earn a revenue stream. And if you can just tap into that, you're going to put yourself on this discovery path of using your best strengths and allocating, the best version of yourself, into the world. And that's going to have a follow-on effect. We have such a misallocation of our talents and resources as a society. And I think Ray is coming to the conclusion over his, 50, 60-year career that in order to succeed, like, you have to be able to understand where your strengths are and press them. And that's why I'm really head into this like advantage mapping. It's like, let's figure out where your advantages are and then think creatively about how we can apply those in different ways that you haven't even thought of.
That's I'm cool. I'm glad we touched on that, man. That's really insightful. Getting to know yourself as quickly as possible, because, like you say, half the time you're in your career, you're like, oh yeah, that's why I like that. Oh, I learned this all in retrospect,